All right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Disciple Standard Podcast. We've got an intriguing episode today. Got a great interview with Eddie Nieves and an update on our movement, but we're going to be talking about cycles in history. It seems that every 500 years, there's a big movement of God. We're going to dig in. What a time to be alive. Let's get started. So for the topic today, Jake, I want to talk about cycles of history. And, not everyone will know this about me, but one of the things I've gotten into the last year or so is boating. And we live near the Atlantic Ocean. And if you're going to take a boat out in the ocean, one of the things you have to be in tune with is how often the waves come, because you need to know how to anticipate the cycles of when the next wave is going to come up to the boat. And anyway, it's interesting, but if you study history, you see that there are certain cycles that seem to repeat themselves over and over and over again. And anyway, I've entitled this little topic today, Cycles of History, and as a subtitle, what a time to be alive, because we just happen to be in a very exciting time in history, if you just think about the history of the world. So what got me into this topic, actually, Jake, you and I, we spent a bunch of time, maybe it's a year or two ago, we wound up making a website that's become a fantastic ministry, Bible Steps.
Oh, yeah.
BibleSteps.org. And the basic idea, if someone wants to begin reading the Bible and they just don't know where to start, the Bible can be really intimidating. And so how do you start? Well, just like how do you eat an elephant? You eat it one bite at a time. Our idea was, how do we just simply help people get to know the Bible? And so we started by just coming up with 5 verses. Look up these 5 verses, read them, take them in. When you accomplish that, you're able to go to the second step, which is these 10 important characters. And so you go through and you read the characters or persons in the Bible, and then after that, when you're done, 15 passages you should know, and then 20 Bible stories you should know. And the idea is there's a check. Everyone has their own profile. You go at your own pace. And it doesn't take long, and all of a sudden you're going to have a basic Bible literacy. Well, in addition to just, having this checklist that people keep so that they can start to get that Bible literacy and make their way into the Bible, one of the things that we did is we made a bunch of videos. And the videos are there just as support or help. And they're things like, what's the difference between the Old and New Testament? How do you navigate through the Bible? And then we get into things like Bible geography. And finally, one of the things we made was a video about a Bible timeline. And it just stuck out to me when I made this video, and we'll just have some of the slides that you even find in the video, that you can really understand the history and timeline of the Bible according to the major events that happen. And so often what I do, there's this series of 8 events in the Old Testament and then kind of like 3 things in the New Testament I want people to know about. But I've told people, if you want to catch the dating, here's the major dates. And I say, look, 2,000 years before Christ, you have Abraham and Sarah. So you have the time of the patriarchs. Just think, okay, that's 2,000 years. Then the next major event is the event of the Exodus, which, if you want to just have a round date, 1500 BC. And then if you're looking for a next major date so that you kind of know when things in the Old Testament are, you can think of the time of David. He's 1000 BC. So we move from the time of the judges to now we have a monarchy and David, 1000 BC. And then the next major event is the exile, and then in 500 BC, right about then, the return from exile. And so if you're just thinking about, all right, where do I peg things in the Bible, dates on a timeline, you don't go wrong by thinking about 2,000, 500, 1,000, 500. And so we made those videos, and even for me, I was like, wow, okay, that's helpful. I'm glad I know that. I'm glad other people can know that. And if you want to know more, of course, BibleSteps.org. Encourage everybody who's listening, sign up for a profile. It can be really helpful to you or maybe people you know. But I was starting to think to myself, like, I wonder if you think about Christian history, whether that same 500-year cycle continues. And I was beginning to think about things like the Protestant Reformation. I mean, Martin Luther nailed his theses 1517. And I was thinking about, 1000 AD, about that time is when the church split east and west. There was this great schism in the church. Anyway, I started looking for some books about this, and there's a couple I came across. One was the book Millennium by the historian Tom Holland, and he makes just a very interesting case about how important and what a hinge in history the year 1000 was, how people were expecting Jesus to return at the end of 1,000 years, and all the turmoil and culture and how the church made a change at that time. And anyway, then I started thinking more about it. I thought, it was about the year 500 when Rome fell for the first time. Anyway, I came across this quote in a book by Phyllis Tickle, and it's by Mark Dyer, who's an Anglican bishop. And he made this claim, and it was, I'd been thinking about that. And I thought, people have studied this. And it is. There's a wave that continues every 500 years. This is what Mark Dyer said. He said, about every 500 years, the church feels compelled to hold a giant rummage sale. I don't know what you think about when you hear that quote, but it's kind of like there's this old way of doing it, and the church kind of takes that out and gets that out and then brings in the new. So kind of taking out the old and bringing in the new. And anyway, in this book, Phyllis Tickle, called The Great Emergence, she makes this case that, the year 500, the year 1000, the year 1500, are not exactly those dates, but in waves about every 500 years. Now, if you think about the Bible, we got 2000's Abraham, we got 1500, the Exodus. We've got 1000, David. We got 500, the return from exile. Of course, what happens at 0 AD? Well, that's the birth of Christ. You couldn't think about a bigger event in history than that, more world-changing. But now, this is what she says. In the year 500 AD, you have the fall of the Roman Empire. So Rome fell in 476 AD. And the Roman Senate disbanded in 480 AD. So can you imagine kind of like the tremendous changes that must have been occurring on the world stage, this Roman Empire that just dominated everything? Now it fell. And the Roman Senate was like, well, there's no point anymore. What a change that was in the world. And the Council of Chalcedon was 451 AD, which was just a seminal church council that was really about theology. Who is Christ and what's the nature of his incarnation? And the big issue at the time, I don't know if you know this or not, Jake, was whether you could call Mary the mother of God. So is that orthodox or is that heretical to call Mary the mother of God? And what the issue was this: did Mary give birth, to God? Was Jesus God? Or did she give birth to just a mere human who later became God or had some spiritual quality which was added on? And the Council of Chalcedon met about this. There was a lot of debate about it. And finally they said, no, look, there's no other way to understand it. Jesus is fully human. He's fully divine. And Mary is the Theotokos, the mother of God. And that is orthodoxy. And once that was decided, there was this massive question about how do we understand Christ? And then that was decided. And that propelled the church forward, actually. And anyway, one of the other things that happened at that time, of course, many people see the year 500 as the beginning of the Dark Ages or the medieval period or the early Middle Ages. And that's because Rome fell, all these structures were broken down. But a lot of people point to Pope Gregory the Great because what he ended up doing in a time of great illiteracy and chaos and confusion, the Dark Ages, is he made these learning centers or monasteries that really preserved the Christian faith and provided leadership to the world. And so, a lot of the intellectual activity and a lot of the scholarship, it was now happening in these monasteries. And Pope Gregory the Great is the one who began to the world was getting organized in a new way. Anyway, that's the year 500 AD. In the year 1000 AD, we had the Great Schism. In fact, it was 1054. The church split east and west. There were these two power centers, and there was cultural and theological and practical differences between east and west. But two cities, Constantinople and then Rome. And in Constantinople, they thought that the Lord's Supper should be celebrated with leavened bread with yeast in it. They really were championing the Greek language. And then in the Nicene Creed, they were saying, look, when you think about the Spirit, he doesn't proceed from the Father and the Son. He just proceeds from the Father. So that was some of the theology. I mean, it's hard to imagine why the church split over these things, but this was the first massive split in Christianity. These were the issues. Language was one of them. Culture was one of them. But leavened or unleavened bread, and whether the Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son or just from the Father. The Eastern Church says leavened bread and just from the Father. Whereas the Western Church, which was maybe more centered in Rome, they used unleavened bread during the celebration of the Lord's Supper. The Latin language was dominating, and then they said, no, the Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. This today, I think, seems like such a strange thing for this church to have split over, but it did. And for the first time, you had this great schism, East and West. And anyway, a turning point in Christianity in so many ways. Finally, of course, the Great Reformation, which took place in 1517. And I guess you shouldn't only have that one date, but October 31st, 1517 is when Martin Luther supposedly nailed the 95 Thesis to the door of the Wittenberg Church. And you had these solas, these articles of Protestant doctrine that Scripture is the sole or only authority. Christ is the only way you can be saved, Christ alone. You're saved by grace alone, through faith alone, and everything is to God's glory alone. And these solas became like a rallying cry for the Protestant Reformation. And again, you had this huge shakeup. Some of the things that happened, you had the printing press, you had this renaissance of thought. There was this huge shakeup in culture and in the church. And anyway, that was a turning point. But now, just think about this. 2000 BC is Abraham. 1500 BC is the Exodus. 1000 BC is David. 500 BC, the return from exile. At 0, of course, is the time of Christ. 500, the fall of Rome, and the church now, moving forward in a new way. 1000 AD, the church is now distributed in a new way. Now you have the Protestant Reformation, 1500 AD, which now leads the question, whoa, here we are at another hinge in history. I just wonder what you think about this when you hear all of it.
Yeah, I'm not the biggest history person. And I remember talking to you about this when we filmed all those Bible Steps videos. Like, the way that you described it there, and even here too, like it made it so clear and so much easier to understand. And so, I don't know, for me now, I think like we get to be a part of it. I'm really excited to see how it's going to change. It's already changing. Yeah. As you see.
What a time to be alive.
Yeah.
that's the subtitle of our episode. What a time to be alive. And not that other people living in other times didn't have exciting times, or not that, hey, it might actually be a difficult time to be alive because we have all this uncertainty and a hinge of history. But what a time to be alive. Now, I'd like to think about this just a little bit, and I want to draw some parallels, why history is hinging right now, and why this is in such an important time, and then just my thoughts about maybe what's God doing, to just try to anticipate, like, all right, God's obviously doing some new thing. We can see that. Well, maybe there's a parallel. The time period maybe we might know the most about because it's the nearest to us is the time of the Reformation. And there are some things that were happening at that time, like the printing press had just been invented. And as a result, you could have this new doctrine of, sola scriptura, Scripture as the sole authority. Why? Because now everyone could read the Bible for themselves. I mean, there was mass production. And whereas before, everyone was really dependent upon, going to church and hearing from the priest because that might be the only person who had a Bible. Now you could read it yourself. And it was like you weren't as dependent upon the Roman Catholic Church for that authority anymore. You could hear God speak to you, in your own language. You could read the Bible for yourself. And this just became, a new way of spreading information so that everyone had access to it. So there was that. Also, the world got a lot smaller. So, we're thinking about the year 1500. We all know what happened in 1492.
Oh, that's when Columbus sailed the ocean blue.
That's
I know
it.
that.
So if you think about this, all of a sudden, like there was a new kind of worldwide travel. So there was a type of exploration that people had, a sense of wonder about, the larger world. So there's a lot of things. And, even in learning, there was this new renaissance that was happening. What had happened is a rediscovery of, the East brought over Plato and Aristotle and all these philosophers who no one had heard about for a long, long time are suddenly being recovered. And there was a renaissance in thinking. And anyway, there were a lot of things that God was doing in culture and then a lot of things he was doing in the church. And I like to say that, boy, there's a lot of things happening in our culture and a lot of things happening in our church. So just the parallels. So we had the printing press in Martin Luther's time, but now think about our time, the new communication tools that are suddenly available that have, made it so that you don't have to go anywhere to learn anything. So you think about the internet, you think about, social media platforms. All of a sudden, you have on your phone in your hand access to every piece of information you could ever want instantly. And so there's a way in which, like, even the Bible and, here we are videoing something, YouTube, TikTok, you name it. There's all kinds of ways in which information is now being distributed that is more direct. One of the things I think is interesting, at the time, the Roman Catholic Church was protesting like, hey, you guys can't just read this yourself. You've got to come to the authority. And, here we've had this COVID time, and I think it's just so interesting that people are listening to like a 19-year-old kid in his bedroom on TikTok more than like the head of the CDC. You used to have to listen to the talking head on the evening news. That was the only source of information. Now, people are very comfortable going to podcasts, gathering information themselves. And so there's all these new possibilities that are there because you don't have to go to a central source. And I think even when it comes to learning the Bible, we talked about Bible steps. People can really have aids and helps that are available now that I never have before. Then I think about 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. The world got smaller. There was this worldwide travel. Well, boy, it still was a long ride across the ocean in a ship. But now, we could be in London in 7 hours. We just get on a flight. We can go anywhere in the world quickly. And so the world's getting smaller and people are more connected to each other in ways that they never were before. And that's happening in culture. But now, here, at the time of the Great Reformation, before the time of Martin Luther, if you were just looking at the state of the church, you'd say, oh, man, things are in real decline. And you might have almost a negativity, like, oh, all's lost. And yet, God's about to do some new thing. And I think maybe there's some parallels because the church has been sort of existing for a while. It's had its way of being, but it's in decline, especially here in the West. And if you're looking out at the church, especially in previous episodes, we've talked about the decline of church membership. And we say, oh, man, all's lost. But is it possible that God is doing some new thing? I don't know. Any thoughts, Jake?
Yeah. My first thought is, if you look at, like you're describing in the Reformation when they made the printing press, it allowed the information to not, like you said, be from that one figurehead, that one talking head on the news or whatever. It sounds like it's getting more decentralized.
Yeah.
And even more so now where, we're talking about it on YouTube. We're talking about it on Sunday morning. And we're even getting other people, like people are coming up to me on Sundays and we're just talking about this. This is great. Yeah. The disciple standard, like the whole idea, it's a movement I see pushing forward real fast.
Well, you can't speak for God and say, well, I know what he's doing in this new thing. But as far as I can tell, I think the disciple standard is part of this next wave. And I like how you described it. I think this is my take anyway. There's been these moves of decentralization and then, the way that the message has been disseminated more broadly. So Like if you take the early Roman Empire, I mean, the Roman Empire was glorious. We know that from history, but most people were not free. There was a handful of free people, and then everyone else just had like a horrible life. And then here comes the time of Jesus, and he starts setting people free in a whole new way. And it's not just that there are the elite who have like freedom and everyone else is just, their life is horrible, but now every person made and redeemed in the image of God. And so there was this profound new freedom. There was a decentralization that happened in the Roman Empire. And then finally, the Roman Empire, it fell. And now you had all these other nations, barbarians coming in and taking over Rome. But guess what wound up happening? The gospel went out and disseminated even further. And now there wasn't just like one city in charge, because there's all these other nations that are coming in. And you have Charlemagne from France and, England and Germany. And anyway, but then what ended up happening is it got decentralized even further in the Great Schism. You did still have this sense that the church was centered in Rome, but now, there's two centers. And I know a lot of people, and to a certain extent, I guess we can't help but lament how much Christianity broke up after the Great Reformation, the Protestant Reformation. Now Christianity is all broken up, but maybe we could say it just got more decentralized. There's no sole authority, and God's working directly with his people. And we've spent some time talking about this, but even the Great Reformation, though it had this teaching of the priesthood of all believers, it never got down to that level. So much of our, legacy standard that we've had in our churches has been about, I show up and I'm a worship attender. I volunteer a few hours a week in one area of church life or another, and that's my Christian service. But the heart, and this is why, we've got this ancient future where we're going back to what Jesus said, go make disciples. It's not just a handful of people. This is becoming more distributed, more decentralized. At any rate, it appears to me that the time is ripe for some new movement, and I'd love to hear what everybody thinks. I think this is, to me at least, a very intriguing topic to think about. How is our day like another hinge in history? And sure, things are in decline, but maybe they're going somewhere. And what a time to be alive. Who knows that God raised us up for such a time as this? I mean, that's the famous verse from the book of Esther. And it doesn't matter what time period you lived in, that verse tends to reverberate, because God has his purposes for us in the time that we're alive. And anyway, I'm just grateful for all the people who have been a part of this. I sense that we're moving toward a tipping point with regard to the disciple standard, because we're adding more and more people every week. In fact, we're about to describe that. So thanks for listening to the topic for today. I'd love to hear your comments and thoughts about this. What do you think? Is this 500-year time frame make sense of history? Love to hear what you think. Comment, share, make sure to like. And anyway, let's move on to our next segment, the tipping point. Here we go. This week, we're welcoming 7 new disciples into our disciple-making system. And it's not only that we're welcoming disciples, but these are people that are being trained to become disciple makers, which is why every week our number just keeps multiplying. If you tune in, you'll see this. Let me tell you who we have this week. We're welcoming Chris Meehan, who's being discipled by Jerome Burton, as well as Kristen Burton, who's also being discipled by Jerome. We're welcoming Trudy Koch, who is being discipled by Kathy Gelsima, as well as Lauren Mewison by Kevin Grevengood. We're also welcoming Hannah Robinson, who's being discipled by Pam Torr, Markel McCrawford by George Pastular, and Heather Cohen by Andrea Vanderplug. So welcome, Chris, Kristen, Trudy, Lauren, Hannah, Markel, and Heather. We're so glad that you've taken this step, and we're just praying for the power of God to be at work in your life as you begin to learn how to be a disciple maker and take in the power that Jesus wants to bring into your life. We're excited for you. Special shout out to our first time disciple makers, George Pastular and Kevin Grevengood. We're so glad that you've taken the step to move from being a receiver to being a giver. And this is a big deal because more and more people, as they enter the system, are becoming first-time disciple makers. And so George and Kevin, great job. And a special shout out to our first-time multipliers. Now, a multiplier is someone who's taken on a disciple, and their disciple has taken on a disciple. Tom Seal and Bernie Vanderklok, first-time multipliers, great job. This brings the total number of disciples in our system to 670. So another great week. We're glad. Welcome, everyone. Congratulations. Keep up the good work. And now we're going to move to our next segment called Ordinary People. Here we go. All right, everyone. Want to welcome to the show my friend Eddie Nieves. We've been working together as in a discipling relationship for some time now, and I just want to welcome you to the show.
Thanks. It's my pleasure to be here.
All right, awesome. Well, I'd like to just start this interview. I call this segment Ordinary People, and not because, you're not an extraordinary person. I think that you are. But because I really think that when it comes to disciple making, it wasn't that Jesus was looking for these superstar, unique, unicorn, hard to find people. It was just everyday people. And as I've come to know you, we've developed this tremendous friendship. You're just a regular guy. And yet God's really been able to use you as you've started making disciples and multiplying those disciples. So I'm really grateful for our friendship together. And I guess what I'd like to do is I'd like to just start by having you recount a little bit about how it came to be that we started meeting together. And then I'm going to ask you a little bit about your experience.
All right. So I came to Sunlight, and when I came to Sunlight, I was already feeling the urge to step into ministry. I had done some Bible study. I had someone in my life that was already discipling me in the sense where I would go to his Bible studies, and then one day he just said, "You know what? You're going to teach in a couple of weeks, so be ready."
Okay.
And that came to pass, and it was great. I loved it. Not only getting into the Word a little deeper, but also teaching the Word.
Right.
So I was sitting one Sunday at church, and I was talking to my wife about what steps I should be taking to move forward, and she said, "Why don't you speak to Pastor?" And I said, "Well, that's a good idea. That's a great idea. Let me talk to Pastor." So I came up to you, and I shared with you what I was feeling as far as being led to teach or maybe even step into seminary. So when I came to you, I remember you saying, "Well, that's great. Well, why don't we sit down and talk about it?"
Yeah.
And I kind of wasn't expecting that. For the pastor to say, "Well, let's talk about it one-on-one. Let's dive a little deeper into what you're feeling, what you're saying." And then it came to pass that you were like, "Well, I have a discipleship program, and I would love to disciple you. We'll meet one-on-one and study theology." And I was like, "Whoa, that's interesting." Like, I did not expect that at all.
Okay.
I did not know about the two discipleship. I always assumed that the pastor was always out of reach, so to speak. So when you did that was amazing. That was a pivoting point in my life where I thought, well, I feel this inside. Well, here's some evidence that God wants to use me. So we started to meet, and at first I didn't know what to expect. We started to do theology together, but at the same time, we started to do life together.
Right.
And that was what I was not expecting that. I was super thrilled about doing theology and learning about Jesus and being able to teach others. But the aspect of doing life together and just basically going, "How you doing? How's your life?
Right.
What's going on?" And bringing that into discipleship, it brings to mind what Jesus did for his disciples. Not only did he teach them, but he did life with them. And it's so powerful. And that's what I always tell people when I'm trying to explain 222 discipleship, is that it's not only the fact that you're going to learn theology and be able to teach others, but you're going to do life. And you're going to build a relationship,
And I think that friendship is so important. It's important to me. I mean, I just love getting to know you, and we have a great time together. And anyway, I cannot overstate how important I think it is that Christians are developing with other people just real, genuine friendships. And I'm grateful that we have that. Talk a little bit about your experience, because it wasn't very long that you started taking on your first disciple. And then over the course of time, your disciples have been multiplying. Talk a little bit about that, because I think that's also, it's great. It's wonderful.
Right. So prior to us meeting, I was already studying some theology.
Yep.
And reading my Bible, and then coming into to discipleship and having a systematic way of learning theology and
Right.
and sitting with you one-on-one and being able to ask those questions and get those answers sort of solidified what I was already learning. So in that sense, I was like, yeah, I can teach someone this. You have it set up where you have the necessary tools to step into it. So we talk about ordinary people doing amazing things with the help of God, and you have a system that's set up for ordinary people. You don't have to be a teacher or a scholar in order to do it. So at a quarter of the way through, you told me there was somebody that you had that would probably fit pretty well with the way I am, and we would connect. And so I reached out to him, and it was truly a connection. We started discipleship in the process of me being discipled by you, but me being able to also impart that not only that theology, but that friendship.
Right.
Where in any other situation, I would have never met him possibly and be able to build that friendship. So I started to go with him, and I'm finishing up with him now, and I'm excited about who I'm gonna disciple next, and it just resonates the fact that I'm not going to be the last link in that chain.
That's right.
I'm going to continue to disciple so that they continue to disciple.
O'Neill, who you started discipling, he's taken on a couple of disciples, and so there's now from you a legacy of people whose lives are being positively impacted and changed. And the friendships and relationships that are there, I think that's right. And it's such a blessing.
It is. And I go back to the example that Christ set, in where he did teach his disciples, but he also day to day played a pivotal role in their life. And it's so important for us as Christians to do that. Yes, we want to learn more, and we want to know more about Scripture, but we're also called to do life together. And I think 222 discipleship, as a latent effect, does that in a great way.
Yeah, that's great. I love the things that you've mentioned. If anyone's watching on, I think you've just heard a great testimony about somebody who really feels a tremendous sense of life change and purpose and meaning that's come from this, and just something that ordinary people can begin to see extraordinary results in. And anyway, Eddie, thanks so much for coming on the show today, and for all of you who have been joining us, thanks for tuning in again, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in to the Disciple Standard podcast. We're so glad you joined us. We encourage you to continue the conversation by joining us on social media. Also, if you want to learn more about the Multiply method or learn about how to take the Multiply pledge, we encourage you to join us on our website at multiply222.com. Have a great day.